Good evening, and welcome to tonight's forum, The Wen-Ho Lee Story. My name is Sophia Chang, and I am currently a student at Harvard Law School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And I, along with many other students, have worked for many months to put together tonight's forum. We are so happy you could join us. I would first like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all of our supporters, without whom tonight would not be possible. I would like to acknowledge the Asian American Policy Review, the Asian Student Caucus, the Harvard Chinese Students Association, the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association, and of course, the Institute of Politics. I would especially like to thank a few individuals, Roger Hu, Ethan Ye, Edmund Wong, who have been instrumental in putting this together. And most importantly, I'd like to thank Professor Philip Hyman for being here tonight, and Alberta Lee for agreeing to share with us her family's story. Because of you, we are given the opportunity tonight to learn more about the case of Dr. Wen-Ho Lee and to ask what happened. There have been so many questions surrounding this case, everything from what happened to those tapes, where did they go, to so what does it mean to be a citizen of this nation when you look foreign? Hopefully tonight, through our forum, we will learn more of the complexities of the case and take with us lessons that we can use in the future. I'd like to begin tonight's forum with an introduction of Professor Philip Hyman. Professor Philip Hyman is currently professor at Harvard Law School. He is the James Barr Ames Professor at Harvard Law School, where he currently serves as the Director of Criminal Justice, Center for Criminal Justice. He is also a professor here at the Kennedy School, where he has directed the Program for Senior Managers in Government. After clerking for Justice Harlan of the U.S. Supreme Court, he went on to serve in many very prestigious positions in the government. To name a few, he was the Associate Watergate Special Prosecutor, Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Criminal Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, and more recently, the U.S. Deputy Attorney General in 1993. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Philip Hyman.
I've been asked to do as balanced a summary as I can do of the factual and legal issues leading up to Alberta Lee's presentation. I'll take between 10 and 15 minutes to do that. Maybe it'll be less. Let me start by giving you the government case as I see it. I've been reading the documents. I obviously know nothing firsthand. But the government case goes something like this. Someone may have given the People's Republic of China design information on something called the W-88 warhead. Now, I say someone may have. The record says that an informant, we don't know whether reliable or unreliable, came in and told the government, I think the FBI, that the Chinese had design information on the W-88 warhead. That's number one. Number two, Dr. Lee had come to their attention, to the FBI's attention, several times before as insensitive to or not candid about certain security risks. The FBI case is that he had, on not fully reported meetings that he had had, after going to China, anybody from Los Alamos is automatically debriefed on who he's met with in China, and that Dr. Lee had not been fully open about that, and he had apparently innocently been dealing in the past with someone who the FBI was very suspicious of. This is all of it. This spreads over 10 or 12 years. Dr. Lee had access to Chinese scientists, and he had not revealed that access recently, high-level Chinese scientists. And then here comes the heart of it. This is as the FBI would state its case. Dr. Lee's handling of a huge mass, the equivalent of 400,000 pages on computer tape, of atomic energy material discovered in searching his office. They asked for permission to search his office relatively late in the game, about 1999. He gave permission, and they found references to and tapes which would have amounted to 400,000 pages of material, that having this material was very peculiar and clearly improper. that it should have been kept on classified computers, and it had gone off onto unclassified computers, and in fact onto reproduced tapes. And then finally, because the statutes he was eventually accused of violating, the government brought a case with 59 counts, all require an intent to injure the United States. Their case on that was simply and remarkably bare. It's hard to imagine what he was doing with all that material unless he intended to disclose it to some other nation. That's sort of the case there. So the case again for the FBI, they'd heard that the PRC had gotten design information on our latest nuclear warhead, W-88. Dr. Lee had in the past not fully reported his contacts with Chinese officials when he went to China. He had had access to Chinese scientists. They found, with his consent towards the end of this investigation, a huge mass of material that was on his computers that had been downloaded from classified computers, and it's hard to imagine what else he was doing with it. That would be the FBI Department of Justice case. Now, here are the issues of law and propriety that I think we all have to focus on. I think I've got a complete list. First one was Dr. Lee made a suspect and increasingly the focus of investigative scrutiny based on his Chinese-American ethnicity. I actually find the record there fairly clear. It's quite plain that that was a major consideration, or one of the major considerations in the initial investigation at Los Alamos. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Whether it was the most important consideration, I don't know. But people with similar access do not seem to have been questioned. And people with no access, at least one person with no access who was of Chinese American ancestry was questioned and made a suspect. And several people admit that Dr. Lee was focused on because he was a Chinese American. Along with that question goes the question, did the government end the case to avoid revealing national security information, which is the government's contention, or did they end it because, which they thought would have to be revealed as part of a hearing into whether they had discriminated against Chinese Americans? The contention of the government is, no, it was the judge's ruling that he was going to look into whether there was discrimination against Chinese Americans, it was his determination to look into it and reveal classified information at his hearing that caused them to drop the case. But they certainly dropped it just in time to avoid revealing a whole bunch of documents that would have allowed us to know much more about what role ancestry played in the decision to investigate Dr. Lee. Second question. Were the extremely harsh conditions of his detention justified? He was kept in solitary confinement. He wasn't allowed to speak to family members without someone else being present. He was shackled when he was taken to court. I mean, that means his legs were in leg cuffs, like handcuffs. As far as we know, lights were on in his cell at all times. Were they justified? The judge found, having originally agreed to them on the grounds that there was a great risk that he would somehow or other convey where these tapes of the downloaded 400,000 pages were, that he might somehow or other convey that to some accomplice, had at first said they were justified, and then the judge in August apologized on his own behalf and reprimanded the federal government, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the president, severely for having imposed such conditions. He said that he did not think they were justified, And as a matter of fact, as more and more information came out, he came to the clear conclusion they were not justified. If they weren't justified, then the question arises, were they there because the FBI mistakenly, and the Attorney General gets into this personally, and the Attorney General mistakenly believed that the safety of the nation depended upon those conditions, shackling, solitary confinement, not talking to family without an agent present, light on at all times, or were they there in the hope of coercing a confession, to put it very bluntly? It certainly looks like they were hoping for a confession. They didn't have a case, they didn't have a strong case, and it certainly looks like they might have enjoyed the pressure that these conditions imposed. But who knows? Number 3, was there any justification for charging him with 59 counts, 59 separate instances of espionage or Atomic Energy Act violation, each of which would carry a long sentence? So the total, if you were convicted of 59 counts, would probably be about 22 lifetimes, maybe 59 lifetimes. I don't know. Very long time. The government says, as to that, well, we could prove all of the 59 counts. Well, they were going to have a hard time proving intent. The only evidence of intent was, why else did he download so many pages? But once again, when the case began, Dr. Lee was called in by the FBI to be interviewed, and the FBI agent said, remember what happened to the Rosenbergs? The Rosenbergs were electrocuted. And the 59 counts certainly had a coercive effect. And they were eventually reduced to 1. Eventually the government accepted a plea to 1, which makes you wonder about the initial decision to ask for 59. And there the question becomes, did the government agree to a plea bargain on the 1, to reducing 59 to 1, for the reason they say, which is because they thought this was the best way to get information from Dr. Lee about what had happened to the downloaded tapes and the copies made of them? Or did they agree because they had a weak case from the beginning, and increasingly it was getting weaker, and the judge had decided to release Dr. Lee from detention, so there wasn't likely to be a confession? Remember, on that score, that a short time before, the FBI had asked for a wiretap of Dr. Lee, and the Justice Department had decided there wasn't enough evidence for a wiretap, which is considerably less than the amount of evidence you need for conviction. In these, in the last 2 that I've mentioned, there's a common thread, and it's worthwhile remembering the common thread. The question is, how far can let's say that the government believed Dr. Lee was guilty, but knew that they couldn't prove it. Believed, but knew they didn't prove it. Could believe wrong. I'm not suggesting correctly. Let's say they had some kind of conviction or guess or something. How far can the government go in using the discretion it has in multiplying charges and in urging the judge to impose very severe conditions of detention and to keep a man or a woman locked up in the hope of strengthening the case by those pressures, in the hope of turning a weak case into a strong case by getting a confession when they can't prove the case at the start? That issue is sort of floating behind. One FBI agent says, this is a little bit like Al Capone. We couldn't get Al Capone for organized crime, but we got him for tax evasion. Finally, the last question is, did the government vastly exaggerate the possible loss of nuclear secrets? Let's say possible just from a hacker getting into the now no longer secure files. Well, there's a pretty sharp dispute on that, a number of people, including a very noted nuclear scientists, say it was vastly exaggerated. The government has a tendency to treat every spy case, I've been involved in a number of them, to treat every spy case as the worst and most dangerous case that has ever come up, or loss of classified information, to exaggerate. There's a known tendency to exaggerate here. On the other hand, there are some of the scientists who say, no, this would have been very serious. I have no way of being able to judge that one way or the other. And with that, I'm going to turn you to Alberta Lee. Alberta, you're going to have to correct me because I've now left the notes you so nicely just gave me at my place. Alberta Lee graduated from UCLA with a degree in English. She is a technical writer now, and she's a technical writer, but she is soon to be a great television star because she's become the family spokesman, and the media seems to love her. On the other hand, the experience that her father's been through has encouraged her to think seriously about law school, something that I think is a very good idea. Alberta, welcome.
Thank you, Professor Heinemann, for that introduction. And he raises a lot of interesting questions that I wish I were able to address directly. I'm going to kind of just go over some of them. There has been reports that my father did not fully report his contacts, but we know from the August 2000 bail hearings that in fact my father did report the names of the people in this so-called suspicious meeting in Beijing in '88. So if you go through the transcripts and things like that, you can actually find a lot of answers to these questions, especially from the bail hearings. The other thing I wanted to do before I got into my speech was just talk about this idea that perhaps the government had no case, or why did the plea bargain happen? I'd like to point out the date that my father's plea bargaining happened was September 13th, Wednesday, and the date for the deadline for discovery on selective prosecution motion, which is to find out why my father was prosecuted when dozens of other people hadn't been prosecuted. That deadline was September 15th. So it was just very interesting that although the government had argued so vehemently against bail for my father in just the previous week, they decided to plea bargain once they started getting the information together for selective prosecution. So I just wanted to say those things about the questions you raised. And I also want to thank Sophia Chang for having me and working so hard. She's brought me here before, and she's terrific. And I also want to thank Bill White with the Forum Office and Harvard for giving me this opportunity to speak and reach out to all of you. I have spoken in the past here, and some of this may be familiar to those of you who have heard, but what most people don't know in America is what my father is like as a person. And when I speak in public, what I hope to convey is what he's really like, because he's been painted as a very sinister man with a lot of suspicious activity, and I hope to humanize him, or at least let you know that it's not all it's cracked out to be. He shows his love for people through food. And my brother and I are both I'm 5'10", my brother's 6'3", my parents are both 5'4". And if you look at us, it's this funny family portrait because we're so odd looking. But I always tell people when they say to me, gosh, you're so tall, well, my dad stuffed us with food. He made sure we were well fed all the time. And when our friends come over, my parents always immediately prepare food for them, whether it be freshly cut vegetables or fruit, or if it's around mealtime, they invite you over to eat and insist that you eat with us. Even if you've eaten already, you have to eat again with us. So my father really just spent all of his life when he was here raising my brother and me, and his biggest concern was that my brother and me would turn out okay. And he didn't really, when this all started with my dad, when the the media leaks happened in March '99, he told me, as long as you and your brother are okay, we don't care about us. Don't worry about me and your mom, because as long as you're okay, we're okay. Which was put a lot of pressure on us because they want us to continue with our regular lives, my job and my brother in med school. And so it made it really tough for us. We had a lot of pressure to try and speak out for my father while at the same time maintaining our lives. But that's just what he's like. I mean, he was a father first above everything else, which made speaking for me that much easier. You can ask some of my friends here from high school. They'd never imagined I'd be speaking publicly today. I mean, I wasn't on debate team or in high school or anything like that, and so I was never a trained speaker. You can probably tell right now, but my father's also very naive, and I say that not that it's a bad thing, but he cooperated with the FBI on over 20 occasions before he hired a lawyer. And he wouldn't hire a lawyer till the day he was fired, and his name was leaked to the media, and we had vans up and down our street parked out to try to get a glimpse of my father. He just really felt that he hadn't done anything wrong and that there was no need to hire a lawyer. So no matter how much I begged him to hire a lawyer, he wouldn't. And it wasn't actually until the FBI compared him to the Rosenbergs, where they basically browbeat my father for over an hour. And you can get the interrogation transcript at wenholy.org. It wasn't until this interrogation happened that my father realized that it was very serious and that he should get a lawyer. And so what I ended up doing was calling a friend of a friend of a friend who led me to Mark Holscher with O'Melveny Myers, who's just turned out to be our savior, just a terrific lawyer. But he maintained all along that he didn't need a lawyer, and no matter how much I begged him to, he wouldn't. And I think he now is a little bit less naive, and I think he trusts lawyers more now. He'd only had a lawyer once in the past, and that was to write a will, and he had to pay $200 for it, and he thought it was a big ripoff, so he didn't see the need for lawyers. I'm going to talk now a little bit about what this has been like for me, or just what's happened to me in the course of the last year and a half. Before all this happened, I was trying to just go on the yuppie track. I was working at a software company, just wanting to save money and buy a house someday. And, I didn't really care about politics. I didn't really read the newspaper that much either. But this experience has completely changed my life. And one of the first things I learned was how the media works. And we're all a little skeptical, just from being intelligent, capable human beings when we read newspapers, of reading between the lines or recognizing when a spin is going on. But I had no idea how powerful the media can be. And the day my father was fired was a day that it became personal for me, and I was actually screaming at the television, saying, how can you be saying these things about my father? It's so not true. And it was just a shock for me to see how people would take in what you read in the newspapers and take it for truth. And it's really, it's been a big learning experience for me, how the media has influenced my father's case. As a result of this negative press, we actually experienced a variety of reactions from our friends. Some were immediately supportive, and like our family friend Cecilia Chang, who started the website wenholy.org, was extremely supportive and knew my dad was innocent and immediately started to help us. On the other hand, some of my friends, especially friends whose parents are first-generation Chinese or first-generation Israeli or first-generation other things, kind of avoided my brother and me for a while and told us, well, our parents have asked us to not talk to you, not have contact with you. And this is our friends from Los Alamos whose parents work at the laboratory. And that was just a shock for me because overnight, some of my friends couldn't really talk to me or didn't talk to me in the same way. And you just never think this is going to happen to you. And now a lot of them are talking to us and apologizing and I did understand. I had to understand what they were going through too, because overnight, many people in Los Alamos became under suspicion if you're from Israel or Germany or Korea even. I mean, a lot of people whose parents were immigrants suddenly experienced, I think, a sense of questioning about their loyalties. The next thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is, so my father, there's a timeline to all this. which might help answer some of Professor Hyman's questions also, which is my father was actually publicly leaked to the media and fired, I think, March 10th or 11th, 99. And then it wasn't until December 10th that he was fired, or he was arrested, I'm sorry. And between March and December, my family underwent severe scrutiny from the FBI. Basically, they fired him and labeled him as a spy for the media, or spy for China, with the media and the government working hand in hand. What I've learned is like the government can come forward with a hypothesis about someone, then lift half-truths from someone's life and present it in a way to make it sound like the person's very suspicious or negative or possibly even a spy. And what happened was I'm sorry. The things that happened in this timeline they're trying to talk about is they label him as a spy, and then they can't find anything on him, so they go through our life records. They go through everything until they find on his computer he's downloaded some files. So that's the one thing that they make, and they spin and they pressure the public about. And so it was these files that they found that my father had downloaded, which is the only count that he pleaded guilty to in September. That was what they took, and that's what they've been spinning for the last year and a half. And from the time they found those files to December, my family and I were followed by the FBI, sometimes up to 12 cars, wherever we went in New Mexico. We would be followed, and they'd just drive behind us, or they'd drive in front of us. They'd park in our neighborhood. They'd completely harassed our neighbors. They were parking outside some of our neighbors' daughters' bedroom windows. And they would follow us into stores, watch what we bought, see who we talked to, and then follow us when we came out. So it was really nerve-wracking, and I would actually drive 55, like in a 55-mile-per-hour zone, I would drive 35 just to see how many, just to count the number of cars behind me. And I would walk into stores, and they stood out, and they didn't try to be covert either. And it's really just humiliating, because I'm born here, I was raised here, I didn't really experience that much racism growing up, but I'd never felt so much scrutiny before, or so much distrust, and I never imagined it would happen to me or my family. And this is America, where stuff like this isn't supposed to happen, and yet it happened to me, and it's been, for me, just a humiliating experience. My father came here for a better country and a more stable political system, and this is what's happened to him. So when my father got arrested, the lawyers decided to start working with the community and some grassroots supports about trying to help get the word out that my father could be innocent instead of could be guilty. And we started working with various organizations. And that was tough, because back then, no one really knew what to believe. And my father had only done one public appearance with 60 Minutes before that. So basically, I was begging people and begging organizations to try and help. If not on the grounds that my father's innocent, on the grounds that he's being treated without due process. He's being treated as if he's guilty and has to prove his innocence. And some of the first people to come to help us were part of the people in the Japanese American community who remembered clearly the experience of the internment camps in World War II. And that helped a lot, because this is the same situation where when national security is used as a threat, all civil rights are thrown out the window. And that's basically what happened to my father. So I started to work with different groups of people and started traveling around and fundraising. But yet, still all along, I found very little support, especially from leaders, from many leaders. And what I've learned is the more powerful, the more successful you are, the more you have to lose. So the less people are going to come help you with a controversial issue, because they have so much to lose. And so that was really hard for me. And to this day, I'm still amazed that he's out. I'm thrilled and I'm happy, but I can't really believe it, because I was prepared for a fight for my life, and I was basically ready to go on a hunger strike when he plea bargained. So I'm just really, it's great that he got out, but we're fighting so much, and we're fighting such an uphill battle for so long, that I just never believed this would happen. And one of the things that's happened to me, and will continue to happen to me, is I don't really know who to trust anymore. You kind of know, like, basically when you meet people what they're like. But now I know I'm never going to trust an FBI agent if they come knocking on my door. That's for sure. And the one thing I've learned, and that all of you should know, is if the FBI does come knocking at your door, you don't have to talk to them. You can just say, submit something in writing or talk to my lawyer. But what I wish my parents knew and wish I knew then was that you don't have to talk to the FBI when they come knocking at your door. My brother and I experienced a series of events, not only being followed wherever we went, but also our emails being subpoenaed at work or in school, which is a little humiliating because you get jokes in the mail and you get jokes in the email and stuff like that, and you just don't expect that everything you're doing or everything you've got communication-wise is being tapped or listened to. So I want to talk a little bit about what it was like to visit him in jail, because it was an experience I'll never forget, and actually try not to remember it because it was so hard for me, and I've been trying to get on with my life, so speaking about this is hard because I have to remember all of the pain. But the first time I visited my father, we were not allowed to speak to him in Chinese because the FBI agents thought that they had to surveil everything that was being said, and my father could give my brother and me some kind of a coded message in Chinese. And so we had to speak English the whole first few times that we were visiting my dad. And I think the worst thing was seeing my dad being brought in to visit me. He was wearing like a red prison suit, which I guess is for like murderers and rapists, like the worst type of suit that people wear. And he would be handcuffed with a chain to his waist, and his ankles would be shackled. So he would be basically like walking like this, because that's the most movement he had. And then the worst part was we would meet in a room separated by glass, and there was an intercom on either side. And the worst part was, like, because of his height, because he's short, he'd have to lean up on his chair, lean up on a counter in order to press the intercom button in order to communicate to us. And it was just really awkward and painful, and just to see him treated like that was like he was being treated like an animal. There were always 2 FBI agents who would sit in on our conversations, so I tried to be very, I tried to let him know how much support there was out there for him and things like that, but I couldn't really communicate with him all this time. He could make phone calls, but there was a packet this thick of restrictions about the phone calls. So he rarely made them because they were also $60 a shot, and he wanted to save me money. But I wrote him as much mail as I could, but he couldn't call me that much. And when I visited him, it was just so painful each time to see him behind glass. I would just begin bawling, and then he'd get mad at me and tell me to not cry, and then I would say, okay, I'm trying not to cry. But it was always impossible just not to cry to see your father treated like this. My father's the rock of our family. He was always the main income provider. And to our extended relatives, he helped sponsor a lot of our relatives over to the States. And he's just always been like this rock. People go to him for advice within our relatives and things like that. And so to see this happening to him was just completely outrageous and traumatic. The bail hearings happened in December, and what I want to talk about next is what I learned in January and February of this year. I learned that although certain politicians have said that my father failed his polygraphs, he actually passed the first one with flying colors. He actually got the highest scores possible that you get on a polygraph. I'm not saying I'm endorsing polygraphs here, but what I'm just trying to say is that he was lied to about the results of these polygraphs. And that was the first time I saw the interrogation transcript. And in it, you can see my father's limited English. You can see that he's not a native speaker. And you can also see how these agents were just browbeating him, trying to threaten him with anything, threatening him with my brother and my livelihood, my mom's livelihood, his pension, everything, just to get him to confess to something that day. But there were some good things that happened last year. One was that we got so much support from all these people across the country, some who knew us, some who didn't. And it was tremendous because my 5th grade teacher came forward for when we got bail in August, when we were talking about bail in August. My 5th grade teacher came forward to donate her home, her biggest asset, towards my father's bail in case my family didn't have money to make the bail. So that started off a whole group of people, and we had about 15 to 20 people who donated their homes for my dad's bail, and we ended up not needing all of it because it was only $1 million, but it was still just an amazing gesture. And we got so many letters from people all across the country who really just said, like, they've been through McCarthyism or they've been through the Japanese American internment experience, and just told us that they would pray for us and they would be there for us. And I think that's what really helped me get through all of this. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I'm going to take questions. I want to say something about race. Being like an American-born Chinese, and also I'm 27, I really don't like to talk about race, and I really wish that race hadn't been an issue in my father's case because it's such a sensitive subject. I actually grew up with very little racism, if at all, and had a great childhood. And when I went to college, I went from being the only Chinese person in my class to being one of, I don't know, 15,000 or something like that at UCLA. And that was a good experience for me because I got to do some identity searching and soul searching about being an Asian American. I even took some classes at the Asian American Studies Center at UCLA and got to know quite a few people who were activists or were activists in the 60s. But after about a year, something happened. I was awakened, but then something happened to me and I thought, this doesn't really apply to me. This is all whining. This is in the past. America's moved on beyond this, and we're not doing that anymore. So I dropped out of the whole scene. And what I know now is that racism is unfortunately alive and well in the United States. And what happened to my father could happen to all of you, any of you, no matter like your gender, your race, all these things. And what I've learned from this too is that it's happening more than we know because my father's case is very high profile. And there's a lot of people who are going through this that you don't hear about. Driving while black or brown, for example, in California, it's basically understood that there's a lot of racial profiling happening that shouldn't be happening. And the reason why I finally succumbed to believing that race was an issue was because Robert Vrooman, an investigator on my father's case, spoke out and said that ethnicity played a large factor in why my father was prosecuted. And then Charles Washington, who was in the DOE Counterintelligence Division, also had a declaration where he said he thought ethnicity played a large factor in why my father was prosecuted. So, all of you are here probably just because you're curious about the case, but I also want to communicate to you that this is also a case about racism. And the fact that the plea bargaining happened before the information about selective prosecution could be provided to the public, we need to find out why race played an issue, and we need to make sure that it stops playing an issue in investigations like this. So, thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to questions. If you want to ask questions, please come to the microphones. Could somebody show me where the microphone is upstairs? I can see the two. Right there, okay, and the other one? Right there. There may be things that Alberta Lee cannot answer, so I would certainly advise her as her father, if I were her father's lawyer, that there would be some things she shouldn't answer, so please indulge her if that comes up. Yes.
I'm Rena Miller at the Kennedy School student. I just have a couple of things I'm curious about. I've heard the sort of media implications, but I've never heard the personal story. Well, what was the reason that your father downloaded all that information, if you can say or give your personal opinion? And also, from the personal side, what are your father's feelings towards mainland China? How would you characterize them?
Those are really good questions. I'm writing this down because I forget as I talk. About why he downloaded these files, there is a great article in this month's Esquire, the one with Bill Clinton on the cover, that actually covers a very interesting aspect of my father's case, which was the reasons for downloading these files. And my father has said before in the past that he was making backups and maintained that all along. And right now in Los Alamos, FBI agents are digging through the landfill trying to find the tapes that my father threw out in the trash. So I think that the Esquire article will provide you more information about, it goes into the computer systems at Los Alamos and how they change and how that can impact the scientists' work if they lose information or if they lose files. Regarding my father's feelings towards mainland China, I think my father came here because he knew he would have a better life here. And he knew that my brother and I would be happier, and he knew the political system here was more stable. And he's from Taiwan, not from China, which is a key point in why the whole notion that he would be spying for China is ludicrous. So I think that he's probably, I don't know what he thinks of China. I'd have to ask him. His favorite country is probably Italy. All countries, actually.
Yeah.
Several questions for you, but I just simplify one question. But the government is persecuted in a Takdi by 59 count. But data dropped to 58. And first question, how do you quantify the account and the count of 1, 2, 3, 4? How to quantify? Second question, in your opinion, among the 58, the count that we dropped by government, in your opinion, which one is relevant to the so-called violations atomic energy code? Is my question.
What was your second? Can you say your second question better? I'm sorry.
The government drop of 58 count. But my question is, in your opinion, I don't know the detail, but in your opinion, the 58 count, what 58 count, in your opinion, just drop the outline, which is relevant to the violation of atomic code, security code.
I'm not a lawyer, but he was charged with 59 counts. 39 the counts, not all 59, were under the statutes of the Atomic Energy Act. And those are the ones that have the clause with the intent to injure or benefit another nation, I think was the terminology. The other 20 counts were mishandling classified information. Actually, it just made me think of a point that I usually talk about that I didn't. The other thing that you should know about these files my father was charged with mishandling is that at the time of his firing and the time they discovered the files, they were all PARD, which is protect as restricted data. And this is significant because after they discovered the files, they changed the classifications of these files from PARD to restricted data or secret restricted data. And John Deutsch had top secret data. So my father's data wasn't even after they decided they were going to prosecute him, wasn't even upgraded to even the top secret level. Unclassified is the lowest, and there's a statute that defines classified as restricted data or above. So technically, even the information was not even classified at the time that the files were downloaded.
Do you think among the 58, most of them is redundant or?
The 58 were, I think it's called stacking charges, is what some people might call it, where they find evidence of like 10 things that were done, like physical evidence of like 10 files, but then they make it so that you breathed on it or that you touched it, and then they charge you with each of those things, so it adds up to 59. They basically stack the charges.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
We have one up there.
Right here. Thank you, Mrs. Lee, for showing up. I think your story is very inspirational, and I definitely wish you luck in this continuing. I wanted to ask you, what's interesting about this whole thing is there was a tremendous media frenzy over what happened with the nuclear secrets. Almost everybody in America knows, yet there's been almost no publicity on the recent events that's transpired in your father's name being more or less cleared. And the fact that the government had almost nothing on him, except for the fact that he had access to information and he had the wrong ethnicity. And what's interesting is this happened in September. I didn't even know about this until about a week ago when somebody sent me the email for this form. I was at work today just talking to average, regular, white-collar Joe Blow Americans, and they all knew about your father's case, yet not a single one of them, except for the Chinese immigrant, knew that his name had been cleared, but except for her, not a single one. Whether they were young, old, male, female, fat, skinny, didn't matter, what their ethnicity was, except for the one Chinese immigrant. It's amazing how, your father's been convicted and cleared. He's been cleared, yet he's been convicted. And the mass frenzy of Chinese about to conquer America somehow, if it seems like that fear that people had when this case came up, that fear still exists now, even though your father has been cleared. So I guess what I want to ask you is, do you plan on, fighting this? I mean, I see you're on this lecture tour, and that's great, but do you plan on taking this to another level? Do you plan on using other weapons? Do you plan on using the civil liberties, teaming up with some civil libertarians and using those avenues and those channels? And if you're not, are you restricted from doing those?
Well, those are interesting things that you say. My father isn't really cleared because he did lose his rights. He's now a convicted felon, so he doesn't vote. He's lost a lot of his rights as a U.S. citizen. And for the next year, the government has the right to snatch him away and ask him questions at any time. His debriefings still haven't ended. I hope this doesn't get forgotten, and we are starting to work with a publisher on a book, as well as a movie producer, to possibly memorialize all this. And I'm going to be very closely involved to make sure that my father's accurately represented. And when it comes to talking, if it talks to, with regards to groups of civil liberties and things like that, the ACLU did write an amicus brief on behalf of the selective prosecution motion, which I think helped a lot. And I think that there's plenty of work to be done, especially for people who are concerned about this case and what the implications are, because there's still aftershocks really within the scientific community with security and secrecy, and really how to retain scientists and keep working on our nation's defense. So there's plenty of work to be done. Maybe you can talk to me afterwards and tell me who I should be talking to. Maybe I'm not talking to the right people.
Let's go over to the right this time.
Hi, Alberta. I just wanted to thank you for your comments again. And I'm a student at the Harvard College, and I was just wondering whether you could explain to us some more about Notre Trulock's role, because there have been a lot of people that have been very significant in the case, like Bill Richardson and Notre Trulock, and just whether what we currently know and what else we're trying to find out about these individuals.
I wish that there were a specific person to blame, that I could blame behind all of this, because I have so much anger in me and rage. But from what I understand, Notre Trulock was a lead investigator out of DC who, in '97, started investigating my father. And actually, from what I understand, the declaration from Charles Washington is talking about Notre Trulock, that ethnicity was the large reason why my father was targeted. I think Trulock was probably doing, like everyone else, their jobs the best they can with the information that they had. I think there was a lot of hyperbole and misunderstandings and people not understanding the way the laboratory works, as well as a lot of hysteria, and then people just basically trying to do their jobs the best they can. So, I don't know if he had all the information either. So there's a lot of people who are behind the prosecution of my father, and he may have been one of them, but I think they're just all trying to do their jobs.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I had read something in some articles that kind of blew my mind, and I was just looking for something, just confirmation if it is or is not true, and maybe an explanation. So it was relating to the data that was downloaded that was PARD, protected as restricted data. I had read that it's actually legal to mail this by restricted mail within the United States, and I've read this in a couple of articles. I just wanted to find out, is that indeed true? I've read it in several reputable articles, but you know how the reputable media sometimes.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've read it several times, and that just blows my mind. If you can mail something legally across the United States, why can you not move it to another computer within a secured building?
Well, apparently, in the August bail hearings, Mark Holscher, my father's lead attorney, cross-examined Robert Messmer, an FBI agent who later recanted some of his testimony, and asked him if this is, secret restricted data and I want to mail it to someone in Los Angeles, all I do is put it in an envelope, label it secret restricted data, but then put it in another, but this is even worse, but then put it in another envelope and then address it to the person you want it to go to. So it's not even on the outside is it labeled secret restricted data. So from what I understand, I think what you've heard is true, and it's a little scary.
Right. That just blows my mind that you can be put in jail for something that's...
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, let's go over there. 'Cause
We haven't gone over there yet.
I didn't see that.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Speaking about the media, I was curious if any of the fellows who broke the story at the New York Times or William Safire have called to apologize to you, a series of articles of race baiting or whatnot, just basically, and whether you will read the New York Times again after this whole story. Thanks.
I used to love doing the Sunday morning coffee New York Times thing, but yeah, I don't do that anymore. We haven't been speaking directly to any of those reporters. I think that there is an article in the American Journalism Review, I think the November edition, that talks about the coverage of the case and what the journalists struggled with and went through in order to cover this case. And it does have an interview with, I think, James Risen, so that might give you more information.
Read the editorial of the New York Times where they commented on their own coverage.
What did I think of the editorial from the New York Times? Well, I think it was, I think something that they said in it that they could have tried to portray my father as a human being or found out about him as a human being. It would have been nice if someone had actually tried to talk to my father or find out what he's like as a person rather than just immediately making him this name that gets totally maligned and used all over the place as a spy. So, okay.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I'm not sure I've seen it anywhere else, is the fact that Bill Clinton was compromised by the Chinese government. In other words, because of the things involving fundraising. I think it's very possible that this whole Wen Ho Lee affair was set up by the Chinese government and the Clinton regime to for instance, bring out the idea of in other words, it was an attempt to play the race card, to have someone as a person of color who could be seen as a martyr, a victim. I think it's very hypocritical of people of color in this country to insist, on the one hand, in cultivating their identity politics, their cultural identity, and at the same time insist that for purposes of their American citizenship, there is no, they represent no danger or have no conflicting interests. That's rather hypocritical, I think.
I think Sophia has a whole new forum to organize based on your question. I don't know enough I'm not big picture enough to answer that question. Maybe you want to answer it.
And I think that probably wittingly or unwittingly, you are probably doing the work of the Chinese communist regime.
That's a new one. That's definitely a new one.
Thanks for offering me the opportunity to answer it, Alberta.
Hi, my name is Ken Choi, a student here at Kennedy School. I'd like to offer my sincere sympathy for the ordeal that you had to go through over the years. It made me mad when I heard about this story because it's been 20 years I set foot in this country and 37 years since President Kennedy enacted the Civil Rights Law, and this sort of racial profiling is still going on in this country. But at the same time, this is the only country probably apologizes for its wrongdoing. It will never happen in China, never happen in Korea, where I come from, never happen in Japan, and so on. And what I want to know is, how is your loyalty to this country or the love of this country has evolved during this period of ordeal? And I don't have any doubt in my mind that you you have this love for this country, but I just want to know how emotion played out. And another related thing is, it is very difficult to prove to the rest of Americans that the Chinese American or Korean Americans, their pledge of allegiance is to this country because of your skin color. So what can you do to make them believe that your pledge or your loyalty to this country is as sincere as the rest of the people? And the reason I'm asking is I'm a journalist actually in Korea, and I sincerely apologize on behalf of my profession, but whenever I approach prominent Koreans or prominent whatever, first thing I worry about is, am I jeopardizing these people just because I'm approaching them? And even though I'm just asking casual questions and make interviews for casual things. So I'm just very curious, what are the steps necessary for you or for Chinese American or second generation immigrants to deal with this problem and not to make this thing happen again in the future?
Your first question was, how do I feel about this country now? And that's pretty easy. Or how did I feel about this during this experience? I was really ashamed to be an American, actually, for the whole last year and a half, until the day Judge Parker read an apology where he basically said to my father that he sincerely apologizes on behalf of all American citizens of what our country's done to him. So that was actually when I started becoming proud of being an American again. But, you know, I don't know how to combat racism. I didn't really want to, I still kind of am a little hesitant to deal with it. You know, it's just something, it's just so sensitive. And, you know, you asked me, how do I tell people that I'm a loyal American? Well, I think the ideal is always that people will perceive you as an individual and not as a stereotype. And as long as you present yourself as an individual and you perceive others as individuals, then they'll hopefully reduce stereotyping and biases and preconceived notions. But I don't know how to combat racism. I wish I knew how.
Thanks.
Let's go over there and then up.
I'd like to ask two questions. The first is, aside from his legal condition, how is your father now? And the second question is that, independent of ethnicity, did you get the impression while all of this was going on that the Justice Department and the law enforcement authorities were simply pressing for a conviction without regard to who they were convicting, solely for the purpose of getting closure on what must have been to them a very embarrassing issue?
The first question is, how's my father doing? And he's doing quite well. He's at home, and he's having a lot of time where he can do what he wants now and doesn't have to, you know, wait to go outside for fresh air, or he can have his own food. He'd had colon cancer 12 years ago, so food is very important to him. And he now can have his daily soybean milk and his vegetables and his brown rice and things like that. And he's still undergoing these debriefings, so he's just going fishing. There's right now in New Mexico, in this weather, you can go hooking, where I don't know what it's called exactly. I call it hooking, but you use this hook that's got little jagged edges on it, and the fish are running by so fast, they're actually kokanee salmon, that you just throw your hook down and you get fish. You don't have to wait for them to eat the bait or anything like that. It's really easy fishing. So I know he's going fishing, and he's probably doing some work on the house and things like that. And I think he's just really happy to be home. Did I feel like the Justice Department was pressed for a conviction? I think there was a ton of political pressure from every angle. I mean, I hadn't heard of most of the. I was so apolitical before all of this, and I learned a lot now. But you know, we had a lot of. I think there was a lot of criticism and a lot of pressures, and like I said before, a lot of hyperbole, and as a result, people just trying to do their jobs the best they can to do damage control. So, you know, I'm not sure who started it. I think it's just this unfortunate mess and dynamic between politicians, congressmen, leaders of our country, the media, just trying to. It started a firestorm really with the New York Times article, and I think after that everyone just tried to work together and try to figure out what was going on. But I don't know if I'd, you know, single out the Justice Department or law enforcement officials. Go
Hi. Thank you for being here. And first, I just want to offer my grave sympathies for your whole ordeal and commend you on and your family on your courage. It seems like an interesting thing about the story is that you were shoved into this position of spokesperson, activist, after you had mentioned you're apolitical, not really worried about what was going on in international politics, let alone local. And when we mention the media fervor at certain times and the relative silence of the media at other times, it theorizes sometimes that can be related to perhaps taking the focus away from other things that are happening, or putting a spin on things. That maybe this, your father's case, was related in some way to relations with the People's Republic, most favored nation status, the World Trade Organization, the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Kosovo, other really big happenings that are all affected somehow by you as and your father as a single person. And I just was wondering, as part of your new awakening, how do you feel about your ability as an individual actor or a citizen of a democracy, theoretically participatory democracy? What can you do as an activist now, and how do you feel about that sort of being that sort of American, fighting for change or whatnot?
Well, I feel a lot of pressure to communicate this story, and I think I'm a pretty lousy public speaker, but I feel like I kind of have to because, you know, most people my age don't care, are more concerned with their cell phones and cars than what's going on in the world. And the scary thing is when I go speaking around the country, people will come up to me afterwards and tell me their horrible story. People who work at Intel or people who don't even work for the government, who are being racially profiled or who've had things really strange or really horrific things or chain of events happen to them. And I guess I'm lucky in that my dad's case was high profile, but you know, I'm also really concerned for people out there who don't have a voice, who haven't been able to get justice. You know, I had a dinner with a bunch of public defenders in San Francisco last weekend, and they told me that 9 out of 10 times justice isn't served. And that scared me because I thought, I mean, they're trying to show me how extraordinary my father's case was, that he actually prevailed after all of this. And I'm very concerned about, you know, what happens to all the people who aren't heard about, who need help. And so I don't think I'll be able to live with myself if I'm not involved with, you know, public advocacy in some way or just helping people.
Alberta, how about taking 2 more and you have to pick them? And then you're still willing to talk to people if they come up after
Yeah,
this?
I'm willing to talk to people
Okay,
after this.
Take 2 more.
Okay, down here.
I just wanted to thank you. I think good thing I've learned tonight is that when I see a woman in your position with a lot of unfair stuff, I still expect you to be warm and supportive, but I strongly feel it's too bad that I think if I was up there, I would still be arguing over something, or still be arguing over my civil liberties, or still finding some more argument, which wouldn't be helping anything. So at least maybe that's one positive aspect of the profiling or whatever, but I mean, I think we would still expect you to be doing more in a position of somebody whose relatives have been accused than me, because I would still be upset about it. So I think that's a good thing.
Oh, well, it's a good thing or a bad thing. I have to be very, you know, I have a public face and I have a private face, and there's still a lot of anger in me, a lot of anger. I've started taking Kung Fu classes, let me tell you.
I'm just starting kickboxing.
Can we do 2 more? Do this guy, then that guy? Just no. No? And then you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for taking my question. My name is Seiji Hayashi, and I'm a physician, and I'm at the School of Public Health right now. And I deal with a lot of race issues, and I really want to thank you for bringing up the issue of race. And as an Asian American, I know that within our community, race is a very difficult thing to deal with, especially since on one hand, we are a minority, but on the other hand, sometimes we're not seen as a disadvantaged minority. So I thought it was very interesting that the people who came to your support were the Japanese American, people who were interned during the war. Did you have any support from the Latino community or the African American community or other minority groups? And what kind of coalition building went on?
We had a group called CARES, which stands for Coalition Against Racial and Ethnic Scapegoating, and that did bring on like the NAACP chapter in the Bay Area and I think some Latino groups. I didn't really, I was spending so much time just trying to survive this that I probably should have reached out more, but I didn't. And I ended up working, I did go to the Driving While Black and Brown rally in Sacramento to talk about how Asian Americans are also racial profiled, but I should have reached in more to that community, and I wish I did. I didn't. I mean, I think it's really not like, it's really, the problem with working with communities, you get stuck, you get labeled, you become this Asian American, you don't become someone who doesn't care what color you are. You sound like someone who cares about only Asians, and I don't want to be pigeonholed like that. But I think what we need to do is we do need to work within communities first to educate and inform, and then we can, broaden out into the mainstream. And I think that my dad's case, because of the national spotlight, it did make people think that, there's this funny name, Wen-Ho Lee, and, is he Chinese or Taiwanese and stuff. But everyone knows, a lot of people know at least one Chinese person or another, and generally they're harmless people. And so I hope one impact of my dad's case was that not all Chinese are spies, as, some congressional reports might want you to believe.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's your last one, Alberta.
Alberta, my name is Stephen Liu, and hearing your story is very moving to me. I came to this country 23 years ago. I'd like to share with some of our spectators here, as white collar, or white people, as we call them, or the Asian people, the way we call them. It's what Wen-Ho Lee shows up is only the tip of the iceberg, okay? And on a daily basis, I experience some of it, but you see it less in the intellectual community, especially in Northeast, in this very civilized area. You don't see that. You don't find that often. But as you go to other parts of the country, it is there, it's live and kicking. And I just want to share with you one personal experience. Not that I'm complaining. I think America is the last hope of human race. If we don't do it well here, we're not going to do it anywhere in this world. And believe me, I have this belief in the past 23 years. We are the last hope, okay? Let's work this together and somehow solve this problem. Instead of complaining and fighting for equality, there's no need to fight equality. We are equal. We are, okay? If you cut down the DNA, there are only a few things that's different. What makes one superior than the other? I'm not trying to preach, but the mindset is we are equal already. It's just that people who are ignorant, less educated, less known about you, who start to feel insecure, who start to feel that you're funny, they reacted that way. That's a human nature. It's a doubt, it's suspicion that causes them to behave that way. And if you look at a lot of FBI agents, if I want to use a semaphore, they're like a boxer dog that trained with the used car sales tactics. And that they're not really bad, but they're educated to do that job. They did it in a very bad fashion, and they come out that way. And so all in all, I'm not trying to philosophically depict this whole thing, but the question is, you have all the support, not just in the Asian community, but also as a lot of people here. I think you just keep doing the job that you are doing, keep spreading the news. We're all behind you. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'll be down here to talk to you if you want to talk to me.
Thank you, Alberta. Alberta wanted to take all the remaining questions, and it's my fault that you didn't get to ask them. I want to thank Alberta. This was really quite wonderful talk. She's very wrong when she says she's not a good public speaker. She speaks from the heart, and you can really feel it. So thank you for coming, Alberta. And my only final remark is that this is a case that deserves to be looked at more and more. I know that there's an effort to get the documents that were foreclosed by the plea bargain on whether there was, what form of discrimination there was, if any, what racial discrimination. The more we know about this, the better off we'll be. And so I hope that the effort goes on. I hope you're part of it, Alberta.
Thanks.